Jake Paul has officially gone too far this time. As everyone already knows, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson are set to fight on July 20th in Texas, and this still doesn't even feel like a real fight. This is a very new low from Jake. Not only is he about to fight an out-of-prime Mike Tyson, but he is fighting a 57-year-old Mike Tyson. 57. There's so much wrong with this. If you know me, I've never been a fan of Jake Paul's boxing career. I literally made a whole video about him and KSI last year about the problems with both of their boxing careers and why I think that they will never fight. But since that video, Jake Paul has only gotten worse when it comes to his boxing career. And I don't mean in terms of his skill, but the level of competition of his opponents. Since Jake entered the mainstream of boxing over 3 years ago, ironically on Mike Tyson's undercard in his comeback fight against Roy Jones Jr., he has been notorious for fighting old, retired, and out-of-prime fighters, then acting like he just beat prime Muhammad Ali. And since I made that video last year, he's only continued with this same reputation and now has fully embraced it by stooping to a very new low to fight a 57-year-old Mike Tyson. But before I start, let me make one thing clear. This video is not me trashing on Jake on the sake of being a KSI fan. A lot of people in the comments on my last video were saying that I was being biased towards KSI, even though it was an equally critical video. Also, people were saying that I was just plain hating on Jake for no reason, even though I was constructing my argument with pure evidence. This video has nothing to do with KSI, but instead the fact that I know exactly the game that Jake is playing, and I'm simply just critiquing his career. And also why this fight with Mike Tyson is just a different level of trash. I guess you could say that this is somewhat of a sequel to my last video, except this one is just about Jake and Jake only. Immediately to get it started, Jake Paul's boxing career is becoming more and more pathetic with every fight. Since fighting Nate Diaz in August of last year, Jake has had 2 fights against 2 pro boxers. The first being Andre August, who had a 10-1 record prior to fighting Jake, and Ryan Borland, who had a 17-2 record prior to fighting Jake. At first glance, both of these opponents seem like amazing step-ups from his past opponents, who mostly consisted of retired and out-of-prime UFC fighters who have never boxed before. Both of these guys were former Golden Gloves champions and had good records. But as we all saw, Jake took out both of these opponents with hardly any effort and knocked both of them out in the first round. You might be thinking, what's wrong with these guys? They're pro boxers with a real background in boxing. That's what you wanted, right? Right and wrong. The problem with both of these opponents is that they were both inactive boxers who Jake was clearly better than, and they looked like they never boxed before even with their boxing backgrounds. Prior to the Jake fight, Andre August had 1 fight in 2023, but did not fight for 4 years prior to that fight that he had before fighting Jake. This was also the case for Ryan Borland, as he had a fight in 2022 prior to fighting Jake, but before that fight, he hadn't boxed since 2018. And the worst part is, the reason why he hadn't also had a fight in 4 years was because he literally quit boxing to work a 9-to-5 job, at an oil rig to be exact. Now that's just embarrassing. That Ryan Borland fight was probably Jake's most embarrassing fight yet, because he literally TKO'd him in the first round and used him as a literal punching bag. He wasn't even fighting back. I think it's ironic that the 2 pro boxers on his record other than Tommy Fury ended up being Jake's most embarrassing fights yet, but it's not surprising why this is the case. Number 1, both of these guys were 35 years old, which I don't really think is a leading factor as to why Jake made easy work of them, but it's just something to note. And number 2, both of these guys were inactive, had padded records, didn't even try to hit back, and were handpicked. It's obvious that Jake saw the padded records of both of these opponents and relied on that for his reasoning as to why him winning these fights should make us take him seriously. That's one of my main reasons as to why I can't take Jake seriously as a boxer and why I continuously have something to say about him. He handpicks these opponents because of their padded records or their name, then when he easily beats them, he tries to pull the card up, "They've been doing this longer than me," and uses that as an excuse as to why we should give him credit for these wins.
Started boxing 2.5 years ago as a pro and just beat one of the greatest ever because I'm obsessed with this. Unheard of, only been boxing for 3 years, beat a UFC legend. He was supposed to give it to me, right? This guy has 19 fights, he's super experienced, so I guess we just gotta step it up.
When you can literally afford to pay the best boxing coaches in the game, it should be no surprise that you can beat an older, inactive boxer that's been fighting longer than you, or UFC fighters that don't box in general. He constantly tries to pull cards like these for excuses on why it was a valid win. After every win against a UFC fighter, he would always use a card of, "I just beat Anderson Silva or Nate Diaz or whoever in a boxing match," when they obviously aren't boxers and are past their primes. Or he used the excuse that he came from Disney Channel and social media and that he's only been boxing for however many years, when once again, he has the best coaches in the game. I think Jake made a mistake by just now starting to fight pro boxers. He started off by fighting retired UFC fighters that hadn't boxed before other than Anderson Silva, but those fights have looked harder for him than these pro boxers. He's went backwards to where people probably would have respected him more if he started off by fighting these pro boxers, but instead he wanted to make as much money as possible by fighting these UFC fighters, then all of a sudden wanted to go down the traditional route to get better and fight actual boxers. It got to the point where before this Tyson fight was even announced, Jake Paul wasn't even on people's radars anymore and they didn't even know that he was fighting. Many people didn't even know that he was fighting Ryan Borland or Andre August. I don't know if this stems from the fact that these fighters were no names, or if it's just because people don't pay attention to Jake Paul unless he's fighting a somewhat big name. Look at all the people that he's fought in the past. Nate Robinson, Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, Tommy Fury, Nate Diaz. These are all people that most people are familiar with one way or another. I think this is why Jake doesn't fight pro boxers. When it's someone that nobody knows, then people don't pay attention. But people don't seem to understand is that since the first Tyron Woodley fight, all of Jake's fights have been through his promotion company, meaning he has been negotiating the terms. Meaning he is handpicking his opponents because he is able to give these fighters a big payday for them to fight him. And this is the missing context that I was talking about earlier. The main excuse that Jake Paul fans use when Jake wins one of these big fights is that of every big time boxer like Mayweather or Tank Davis or Canelo that came up in boxing started out by fighting plumbers and trash cans, which is true, I'm not going to deny that at all. But those boxers did not come up handpicking their opponents to pad their records. Jake's social media privilege has allowed him to even be able to start a boxing company in the first place, and the big boxers of the game today had to come up from the bottom to build themselves up. People seem to forget that. Another thing that those boxers did not do was call out the biggest names in combat sports every chance that they got. That is another reason why Jake just gets on my nerves. He's only had 10 fights and every chance he gets, he calls out Canelo specifically. I'm pretty sure Tank Davis was not calling out someone like Manny Pacquiao when he only had 10 fights under his belt. And even though he fought Floyd Mayweather later in his career, I guarantee Canelo was not calling out Mayweather after only having 10 fights. However, I know exactly what Jake is doing. He calls out these big names to stay relevant in the fight world. He calls out big names knowing that these fighters aren't even going to acknowledge him, so that he can just be more annoying and say that they're ducking him or that they're scared to fight him. And I also don't understand when Jake Paul fans say, what do you want him to do, fight Canelo or Bivol or something like that? He's just getting started. Well, that's awfully ironic to say when he's literally calling out Canelo after every fight that he has.
Fight me. And Canelo, you too, Canelo. Hey, Canelo, stop ducking. I know you want it.
I want Nate in MMA, I want more professional boxers, and I want Canelo.
We obviously don't want him to fight someone like Canelo when he's only been boxing professionally for 4 years, but it's stupid for him to talk a big game when he knocks out an oil rig worker and act like him and Canelo would be a good fight when he couldn't even beat someone like Tommy Fury. And side note, I think that Tommy Fury fight is often overlooked and not talked about enough. That fight truly exposed Jake for not being as good as he claims to be, but people seem to erase that fight from memory and just focus on his other fights where he looks good. All this wouldn't even be an issue if he was just messing around trying to make as much money as he could boxing, but he claims that he loves the sport so much that he wants to become a world champion, but it seems like he's only fighting people he knows that he's gonna beat in order to pad his record and make himself look good. He literally donated his fight purse in the Ryan Borland fight to help renovate boxing gyms, which I can't even critique or hate on. That's just honestly really good on Jake. However, even then, part of me feels like he only did that because he knew that he was gonna easily beat him. That fight was basically a glorified sparring match. But now let's get into the real topic of this video, the Mike Tyson fight. I'm just gonna put it like this is just an absolute embarrassment of a fight. There's absolutely no defending this at all. A lot of people say that Jake Paul has made a mockery of the sport of boxing with his fights, and I never agreed despite my opinions on him, until now. The reason why this fight is such an issue is obviously because of the age difference. Jake Paul is 27 and Mike Tyson is 57, but he'll be 58 on fight night. That is a 31-year age difference. I thought that the Anderson Silva fight was bad, with Anderson Silva being 47 and Jake being 25 at the time, but this is just a different level of insane. Jake Paul was literally in diapers when Mike Tyson bit off Holyfield's ear, which was when his career started going downhill and he was considered out of his prime by many fans. That was in 1997. This fight is so ridiculous that it literally feels like the plot of a movie. Oh wait, this is literally the plot of Rocky Balboa or Rocky 6 or whatever you want to call it. Old, retired, and out of prime legendary boxer that everyone loves comes out of retirement to fight a young boxer that doesn't get respect from boxing fans because he hasn't fought anybody legit. That's literally what this fight feels like. I don't know how Jake expects anybody to take this fight or his career as a boxer seriously. That's the other issue with this fight. Jake is acting like fighting a 6-year-old Mike Tyson is a good fight and that is a respectable win just because his opponent's name is Mike Tyson. Like, just look at what Jake said in the fight announcement post. By sights are I'm becoming a world champion, and now I have the chance to prove myself against the greatest heavyweight champion of the world, the baddest man on the planet, and the most dangerous boxer of all time. Time to put Iron Mike to sleep. What are you proving? That you could beat an old man who hasn't fought competitively in 20 years? Seriously, what about this fight helps Jake improve as a boxer, and what proves that we should take him seriously? Mike Tyson's last real fight was in 2005, when I was literally a year old. I'm 19, about to turn 20. That should tell you everything. The only thing that stops us from being an absolute joke of a fight more than it already is the fact that Mike is still explosive and is a very hard hitter for a 57-year-old, and one well-timed punch could easily end the fight in a split second. But even then, anyone could look good on pads, but you have to remember that a 57-year-old Mike Tyson is also going to be getting hit back. Do people really think that he's going to be able to take those hits from a faster and younger fighter? Jake really put himself in a lose-lose situation with this fight. One, if he beats Mike, which he will, people are definitely not going to take him seriously because he's just proven that he can only beat old, retired, and inactive fighters. And two, if he somehow loses, he will never be taken seriously by anybody and will forever be clowned for losing to a grandfather Mike Tyson. In sports, when you call somebody old, it's typically because they are getting high up in age and are not as good as they used to be, not because they're actually old in age. For example, LeBron James is only 39 years old, but he's considered old in basketball terms because typically NBA players retire around his age or even younger because they just don't have the body and the skill to compete anymore. But in this case, Mike Tyson is legitimately old. He's literally an old man. Not even 2 years ago, he was seen in a wheelchair because of an issue that he was having with his back. The joke around Jake has always been that he likes to fight senior citizens, but it's literally not a joke anymore. I still think it's so ironic that the one fight that Jake has had to where he's faced an opponent around the same age as him, he lost. And the fact that it was to a boxer who isn't even that good in Tommy Fury, who struggled and almost lost to KSI, just makes it even worse. That just goes to show that any active amateur boxer that is around Jake's age can probably beat him. Jake constantly having these fights against older and out of prime well-known combat sports stars does absolutely nothing for him but proves that he only likes to fight older opponents in order to pad his record and not actually face a challenge. I'm not saying that Mike Tyson isn't a challenge, but I really just don't see an almost 6-year-old Mike Tyson beating Jake Paul. When Jake wins this fight, he's never going to stop talking about the fact that he beat Mike Tyson, even though he is old as dirt. We all know a prime Mike Tyson would murder Jake in the ring. Mike has been posting his training footage over the past couple days, and he looks good. You wouldn't even think that he was pushing 60 with how explosive he still is. But all the comments are saying, if Mike loses, then it's rigged, or Jake has no chance. The people saying that are just setting yourselves up. Ever since the first time on Willie fight, I've learned to stop doubting Jake because every time I say that someone's gonna beat him, he always wins in the craziest fashion. Now I'm gonna say one thing, even though I'm not a fan of Jake and his boxing, I've never thought that his fights are rigged. When Jake beats Mike, it's simply just gonna be because Mike is old, not because it's rigged. I understand that it's Mike Tyson, literally one of the greatest of all time, but he's 57. This is only gonna boost up Jake's ego when he wins because literally everyone right now is saying that Mike Tyson is gonna win simply because he is Mike Tyson. But I feel like people are not acknowledging the fact that he's literally 30 years older than Jake and looks good in training, but he's probably gonna tire out and not gonna be able to take the punches. If this fight goes past the third round, Jake is taking it no problem. With all this ridiculousness with Jake even hosting this fight, I'm not gonna put all the blame on him. Mike Tyson obviously didn't have to take the fight, but you know, money talks. Bottom line is that I just really don't want to see an old man get knocked out, especially someone as legendary and likable as Mike Tyson. A lot of you are probably thinking that I'm talking all this trash, but I'm still gonna watch the fight anyway. Well, of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't going to. It's boxing. Literally anything can happen. And to all the Jake Paul fanboys in the comments that are gonna be like, well, I don't see you trying to fight Mike Tyson, or if he's so old, then you should just fight him. Kindly shut up. Me saying all this stuff about Jake's career and Mike Tyson's age is not me talking as if I could beat either of them. It's just me as a newer boxing fan simply critiquing and holding Jake to the boxing standards that he's striving for. I'm not gonna act like Mike has absolutely no chance, but I think that the odds are truly stacked against him. It's really a 20-80 fight in favor of Jake in my opinion. I'm so glad people aren't letting Jake off the hook for this either. Many people have reacted to this fight saying that it's a disgrace and that Jake is ridiculous for even setting this fight up. Even if he wins this fight, he should be ashamed that he's taking pride in beating up an old man. Many people believe that Mike Tyson will win even with the age difference simply because he is one of, if not the greatest boxer of all time, and I just don't believe that this is the case, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.